Shirley had returned from death, a death she had chosen but was saved from. 5 years had passed since that event, and after a long period of depression, Shirley had started a new life. Never ask about the past. This was the only condition Shirley set for her marriage to Alan, and Alan, who adored Shirley, accepted it. It was natural for a woman who had failed in her first marriage and had a bitter past not to want to talk about it. However, Shirley gradually realized that something from her past had come with her into her new life, something ominous that didn't belong in the world of the living. Just a few weeks after their marriage, on Alan's birthday night, Shirley noticed that someone else was in the house. Someone she had seen before and thought was a hallucination. That night, everything had gone perfectly until after dinner. A romantic dinner for two, with a deeply emotional atmosphere that made Shirley fall in love with life again after years. But what happened in the kitchen left nothing but a nightmare. Shirley had gone to the kitchen to get the cake when the power went out. She groped her way to the cabinet and found the matchbox. But before she could light the candles on the cake, she sensed something she dreaded, a stench she had experienced many times during her depression, a reminder of a memory she didn't want to recall. What scared Shirley wasn't the smell, but what she always saw after it. Alan was in the yard, and Shirley could see the light from his phone as he went to check the fuse in the kitchen window. So she was sure that the person approaching her in the dark, whose raspy breathing she could hear, wasn't Alan. In that moment, she thought only of reaching Alan as quickly as possible. She lit a match and hurried out of the kitchen, but as soon as she exited, the match went out. Terrified and trying to find her way in the dark, she tripped over the edge of the couch and fell down on the floor. She couldn't see anything. Desperately, she felt around the floor looking for the matchbox she had dropped, but the sound of the breathing behind her made her more frantic. Calling out to Alan was no use. Her hand finally touched the matchbox, and she quickly tried to strike a match, but her hands were shaking with fear, and it took a moment for the match to light. When it did, Shirley's hair stood on end. Across the flickering flame, she saw the deformed face of a little girl. The girl's skin had remained in a fetal state, with only a faint outline of facial features, while blood vessels were visible all over her skin and face. Shirley threw the match away in horror and, screaming, backed away on the floor to get away from the girl. But soon her back hit the wall, and she had nowhere else to go. The match flame on the floor was still burning, and Shirley could clearly see the girl's feet coming towards her, her hands searching for her. Shirley couldn't bear to look anymore. She closed her eyes, hoping it would lessen her fear, even though she could sense the girl's face right in front of hers. With Alan's arrival, Shirley's nightmare ended, but it was the beginning of her hallucinations in her new life. Initially, the lingering effects of the antidepressants Shirley had taken for years, which sometimes caused hallucinations, seemed to be the cause. But after 2 years of living with Alan, Shirley was now certain that what she saw was real, not only because all her hallucinations involved the same little girl she had seen years before, but for a more important reason: the girl was growing up. This could only mean one thing: she was alive. Shirley had a more compelling reason for believing this: the inexplicable deaths of her children at 6 months of pregnancy, or even before getting born. Doctors had no scientific explanation for the miscarriages, which seemed like accidents, but for Shirley there was only one reason for her children's deaths: the little girl she saw in her hallucinations. A girl she didn't know until she lost her second child. The second child died at 6 months, exactly on the same date and time as their first child, a date that was significant to Shirley and related to an event in her past that she tried to erase from her memory. Shirley remembered that date and time well. Her husband's cheating was so bitter and heavy that just a few hours after discovering it, she cut her wrists with a glass shard after killing the 6-month-old fetus inside her with her own hands. At least that's what Shirley thought. The doctors couldn't explain why her pregnancy symptoms persisted long after the fetus was removed and attributed it to her unstable mental state. But 3 months after that incident, Shirley woke up with severe labor pains that sent her to the hospital. That night, her pregnancy symptoms ended, but it was the beginning of her hallucinations. Shirley's hallucinations started with the smell of decay, a smell she remembered well from when her dead fetus was removed, a smell that filled the entire room. Just a few nights later, Shirley woke up to the sound of a baby crying, and soon after she saw something that terrified her. A deformed infant whose facial features and skin had not fully formed, just like the image of her dead fetus in the hospital. The residual effects of severe emotional trauma and the antidepressants Shirley used were the only diagnoses given by psychologists and specialists. For years, Shirley had calmed herself with these explanations, but now she knew the girl she had killed was as real as she was. No one believed Shirley's stories about the little girl, not even Alan. That's why Shirley was once again under the care of a psychologist, but her condition worsened by the day. She now saw her dead daughter everywhere, to the point where she avoided sex and intimacy with Alan, because she saw her daughter by the bed watching them. With each passing day, Shirley became more convinced that her dead daughter would never leave her, a belief that eventually led to her being admitted to a psychiatric hospital. Her illness was diagnosed as schizophrenia, and from then on, those who visited the hospital saw a recurring scene. Shirley sat in a corner of the hospital yard, pushing a metal swing while humming a lullaby, as if a child was sitting on the swing, a child only Shirley could see.